Good evening. We are Paradox Media's Paradoxal Peeps. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are live tonight from the Mile High Clubhouse. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high. Get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Saturday, November 13th, Sunday, November 14th, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I hope you guys had an awesome weekend so far, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on one of our many outlets. If you're listening live right now, you're listening on Spreaker.com, where you can find us under We Are Paradox Media. You can also find us on KPNL Radio, which you can find at KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. If you like to follow us on your free time, look us up on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, and Podcast Chaser. Make sure you go like and follow us and give that bell a little tickle on YouTube so whenever we have a show coming up, you will be notified. And right as soon as it's put out, that little bell should ring and say, hey, guess what? There's a new show on. And make sure you go on Facebook as well as Twitter and look us up and like us there. So tonight we had a guest fall through. So we're going to do some story time together, guys. And then tomorrow night we have Miss Mia Savage on. We haven't had her on in a while, and she's actually gone through and is repairing from having COVID. So she's one of my really, really close friends, the second one that I've had so far that's gotten it. Pretty sure I had it too, but I have no proof. I didn't get tested at that point because it was not even announced. So yes, this evening we will be doing story time, and the book that we'll be reading from is 50 Strange Stories of the Supernatural, True Accounts of Weird and Otherworldly Happenings. And it's edited by Mr. John Canning. And included in this volume are true accounts of weird and otherworldly incidents by Michael Blee, Douglas Collier, Patrick Dugan, Andrew Ewert, Ian Fellows Gordon, Michael and Molly Hardwick, Dottie Hay, Charles Eric Main, Ronald Seth, Claire Smith, Rosemary Timperley, James Wentworth Day, and Lawrence Wilson. So we left off on the chapter of, here, it is Spirit Healing and Psychic Surgery. And we'd been through, I believe, one story in this chapter. But we left off on Lou Revol. Where would you expect to find a needle, some cotton, a razor blade, a kitchen knife, and some nail scissors? In the back of an old kitchen drawer? Possibly. More or less anywhere really, except in a surgeon's little black bag. But these are the very tools of the trade of a remarkably successful surgeon whose skill with a knife and needle has cured conditions ranging from cancer to nervous depression. That is, when he has not been broke in earning money as a part-time taxi driver. Lourival de Freitas was born at Caro Grande, Brazil, in 1929. Orphaned by a fire when he was very young, he was brought up by his gypsy grandmother, who had built up quite a name for herself in the locality as an herbalist and healer. The young boy must surely have picked up many of his grandmother's skills at concocting and prescribing remedies for all sorts of ills. Certainly, by the age of 9, he was showing that her gift of healing had been handed down the generations. He cured a surprised visitor of a stomach ulcer. As the child grew through his teenage years, so did his healing reputation, till by the time he was 20, his fame had spread far outside of Brazil. One of his cures was performed on the wife of an outside English businessman domiciled in Rio. For the woman, it was the end of an age of suffering. For Lourival, it was the beginning of a new era for his healing powers. The woman's husband was so impressed with the young man's powers that he became his business administrator and advisor. The world would now hear about these gifts. Not everyone was as enthusiastic about his achievements, however. The law in Brazil took a dim view of them for a start, and he was actually prosecuted in 1962 for illegally practicing medicine. Part of the defense consisted of a demonstration cure, and an operation was duly performed on a cancer victim. It was successful. The surgeon received a 6-month deferred prison sentence. His first healing manifestation in London took place true to form, not in a sterile operating theater or even a lecture hall, but in the living room of a house in a quiet, respectable suburb. The patient was a 6-year-old girl who for 18 months had been suffering from a chronic chest complaint which left fluid on the lung. She also had a heart murmur. Doctors had tried orthodox remedies with little success, and now it was recommended that the only course open was an operation to remove the lower part of the afflicted lung. This session had been arranged by the little girl's uncle, who was none other than Lourival's business mentor, but not all those present had such a belief in his talents. Like his counterpart in teaching hospital, the Brazilian operates surrounded by onlookers, though in his case, they are very rarely medical students. On this occasion, the assembly consisted mainly of friends of the family, but their attitudes to the phenomenon they were about to witness ranged from complete faith through curiosity to outright skepticism. What they saw that evening was an operation which in its outward physical form was simplicity itself. The child's wasted body was held in her mother's arms, while an ordinary whisk tumbler with its rim covered by cotton wool was applied, rim downwards, to her skin just over the afflicted portion of the lung. The surgeon did not hold it himself, which, said eyewitnesses, ruled out the possibility of his putting anything inside the glass. Instead, he summoned the child's grandfather, who was one of the more skeptical people present, to perform this particular task. With this man's hand, covered by that of Lourival, firmly holding the vessel in place, the company watched and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then suddenly, through the transparent tumbler, they could see something growing out of the girl's back, even though there had been no sign of any incision made. The thing continued to grow until it finally became detached inside the glass, leaving no mark whatsoever on the skin, and that was it. The child was packing off to bed while the grown-ups continued to party. The next day, the child raided the fridge and began to exhibit something which her parents had never seen in her before: a healthy appetite. Her father later reported in the journal Light that from that moment on, there was a sustained improvement in her general condition, and what had been a pale, sickly invalid rapidly grew into a normal, healthy child. A subsequent medical examination showed that the lung had been cleared of fluid and that there was no trace of the heart murmur. The glass was the major surgical instrument in another British lung operation, though on this occasion the subject of its attack was not fluid but a cancerous growth. It happened at a party. Nearly all his healing is done in a party atmosphere. Curing someone is a happy, joyous occasion after all, he says. This time, It was a party for people in England to meet the man they had heard so much about. He was tired, having just rushed from Brazil to Belgium to treat some people there, and was in England for a rest. There was to be no healing on this occasion, but it didn't turn out quite like that. One of the guests at the party was a young woman who had many problems on her mind, the most significant of them being the tumors she had on her lung, which were claiming 90% of her vitality and energy, and threatened quite shortly to claim much more. Few people at the party knew the cause of her malaise, but the entranced Brazilian found it. He decided to operate. The proceedings began with his making a small incision with a razor blade on the patient's chest just above the site of the tumor. The surgeon placed a needle across the wound and began a lifting motion, but all was not well. The atmosphere in the room was not right. There was a hiatus. Someone fainted, and in the confusion, the identity of the spirit controlling the surgeon's trance changed. The new entity demanded a change of technique. The needle was discarded and a glass found. As before, the rim of the vessel was covered with cotton wool, and a hand other than Lorival's held it rim downwards over the treble spout. This time, under everyone's eyes, the glass misted up and filled with a liquid. In due course, this solidified to an evil-smelling piece of tissue about 1.5 inches in diameter and 1/2 inch thick, which was left in the glass. An ex-nurse, who was present and who knew nothing of the patient's complaint, recognized the offensive odor from her days in the cancer ward. As for the patient, who all this while had felt nothing except something leaving my body, she went back and joined in the party, and afterwards, instead of thinking twice about picking up an ashtray because of lack of energy, running up the 6th flight of stairs, and her top floor flat held no difficulties for her. Lorival maintains that in nearly all his operations, it is not he, the Brazilian taxi driver, who is in charge, but one of the 20 or so spirit guides, who take over his body when he is in a trance. The major influences are Nero, the Roman emperor, and Naor, his own great-grandfather, who is said to be particularly good at handling children. Others who may make an appearance range in personality from Messalina, his only female spirit, to German and French doctors. One of the rare occasions when Lorival has actually healed in his own right without the aid of one of his guides was also in England. The spot was Brighton, and the patient a local vet. This man had been stricken with polio as a child, and as a result had been left with a very weak muscle system. Deterioration over the years had led him to be spending the last 8 of them in a wheelchair, and worse still, had finally made arm movement so difficult that it was almost impossible for him to lift them above his head. Brushing his hair was certainly very difficult. Through the connivance of friends, Lorival was brought to this man's house one Sunday afternoon, and through an interpreter, the Brazilian speaks only Portuguese. They chatted. Lorival was anxious to demonstrate what he could do for the stricken man. He passed his hands over the upper half of the withered body, then suddenly found the spot he had been looking for. One arm shot over his head high into the air, a feat that he hadn't been able to accomplish for years. The procedure was repeated with the other arm. Then came an even greater test. The wheelchair victim was to stand up and walk towards the healer. He managed 6 or so steps, but this was only the demonstration session. Would he be allowed to go further? Lorival asked. He was back in 2 or 3 days, laden with a bundle of Brazilian herbs, which were to be boiled up to make an infusion. This was then to be added to his patient's bathwater. The boiling and mixing completed the victim was lowered by the hands of his friends into the strangely colored liquid. Could he move his legs? No. There was then an explanation in Portuguese that a psychic shock of about 250 volts was about to be administered. It was. The effect was no less than one would expect. The patient shot to one end of the bath looking dazed. But could he move his legs now? This time, the answer was most definitely affirmative. 10 minutes later, the company in the living room were aware that the wheelchair victim of 8 years sitting had just walked the 20 feet from the bathroom unaided. The jubilation was general. Lorval and his spirits were pleased too, and a proclamation was issued to fill the place with all and sundry to take part in general rejoicing and general healing. In the event, a goodly proportion of fashionable Brighton turned up, and was cured. A woman, crippled since she'd been buried by the building which collapsed because of wartime bombing, emerged from the treatment room, pushing her wheelchair. Another woman was found with the surgical collar she had worn for years perched jauntily on her head as a hat. A stroke victim had movement restored to the paralyzed side, and the cyst was removed from behind someone's eyeball with a pair of nail scissors borrowed from another visitor. That is, to me, is quite disgusting. Sorry for the interruption. I'm going to take off my spectacles and have a drink of water. I'm feeling quite parched. But yeah, some borrowed nail clippers. That's pretty disgusting. Oy vey. The most dramatic event of the day, though, was a psychic heart transplant. After most of the guests had gone home, one of those remaining was summoned to the side of his brother, who was not expected to last the night because of a worsening in the already bad condition of his heart. The brother went to the bedside, and so did Lorval and the assembled company. They found the ill man apparently unconscious and very weak indeed. The surgeon looked around for the strongest male in the party. No, it was not to be a family man because there was an element of danger in the process. The donor was eventually chosen, a famous anthropologist, and he was asked to remove his shirt. 2 tumblers were then called for, and one was placed over the heart of each man. The man on the bed was motionless, apparently feeling nothing. The other felt nothing either at first. Then things began to hurt a little. Then they hurt a lot. The next thing he knew, he was coming round after passing out and slumping in a chair. Meanwhile, however, the once unconscious eyes had opened, and he who had been at death's door was talking. He was made to sit up, a prayer was said, and the party left the room. He lived, and continued to do so, for another 18 months. The mentally ill have benefited from the Brazilian treatments too. One of the first English patients to be helped in this way was an autistic child with whom conventional therapy had proved of little use. His mother took him to Brazil with her on holiday with the thought that maybe that country's unusual unofficial medicine would be able to find something to help him. After a long search, she contacted Lorval, who suggested that a brain operation might help the boy. A healing party was duly arranged. This time, the patient was laid face down on a bed while his mother was compelled to photograph the whole operation. It began with an incision at the base of the skull of a fully conscious child with a pair of nail scissors. Oh my goodness. After considerable prodding with the unsterilized instrument and much drawing of blood, some tissue was removed, which was said to be the materialized form of the obsessive entity which was responsible for the boy's obsession and condition. The photographs show the entire operation sequence with the exception of the extracted tissue. The negatives of this stage of the proceedings show the surrounding activity clearly enough, but in place of the tissue there was a blank area in the center of the picture, looking for all the world as though someone had shone a bright light at the camera. Throughout the boy laying quietly sucking his thumb. Finally, the wound was bound up with sticking plaster, and the child joined in the remainder of the party, which continued until the early hours of the morning. He was then taken down to the seashore, and amidst much protesting, was told to cover himself with the radioactive mud to be found there. This he did. The dressings were then removed from his neck, and everyone saw nothing but a fully healed, thin red scar. This was not the end of the treatment, though, for the child then remained in Brazil for about a month, having herbal treatments and leading a back-to-nature existence with the healer. When the boy finally returned to England, friends and neighbors were immediately struck by the change in his condition. Here, in the place of what had been a withdrawn 12-year-old who had to be taken to school and who was incapable of so much as tying his own shoelace, was a healthy boy who would think nothing of running errands by himself to local shops. Lorville's skill as an herbalist came to be the fore in the treatment of the mental affliction of another English child. His trouble of brain damage at birth was diagnosed psychically by the surgeon as soon as he met the boy. He prescribed a series of herbal treatments. The parents were sent a collection of Brazilian herbs, which they were told to divide into batches and over regular intervals to cook a batch in water and douse the child with resulting mixture immediately after his bath. After the second application, bedwetting stopped, and the general improvement in the child's condition was soon being commented on by the staff of his special school. Anxious to see what his son was being given to take, the boy's father took some of the herbal mixture prescribed to the boy to drink to a homeopathic firm for analysis. Their verdict, not exactly what we would have prescribed. One of the ingredients could be very poisonous in some circumstances, but in the particular case, it took and looked appropriate enough. Not all mental cases receive the same amount of herbal treatment, though, for in some treatments, surgery is much more important. Such an operation was done on an English woman who had been suffering from depression for many years. In her case, Lorville showed that a passing needle through one's flesh could be absolutely painless by the threading a needle through his own cheek. He then set out to realign his patient's nervous system by passing 2 threaded needles through chest, 2 through the flesh in her back, and 1 through her neck. Members of the onlooking congregation were then asked to take hold of the bloody cotton now securely threaded through the woman's body and pull it with all their strength. This was done, and eventually the threads were withdrawn. The patient, who claimed that she had felt no pain through the entire process, returned to her seat laughing. According to her sister, the first time she had laughed for many years. The mood continued, and though recovery was not 100%, she has maintained a substantial improvement. But what does it feel like to be one of the man's patients? Not many have recorded their experiences under the knife or razor blade. One who has is the English journalist Anne Dooley. Accounts of her experiences in Brazil have appeared in various national newspapers and in her own book, Every Wall a Door. She was a victim of bronchitis, the same complaint as the young girl who was Lorville's first patient in England. British medical experts had been able to give her little lasting relief. When given an assignment to follow up the story of the Brazilian healers for her newspaper, she availed herself of the opportunity to experience a psychic cure firsthand. In her case, some days before the actual operation, the surgeon marked out the area on her back in which he could operate by scratching it with the sharp blade of a reed. She was then told to cut down her smoking until after the treatment and to take daily doses of specially prepared oral remedies. The operation itself was again a social affair, but this time was in a farmhouse in the mountains, in an atmosphere which was a far cry from the English middle-class living room. Lorival, or rather his spirit guide Nero, treated several patients, but then the surgeon's mood changed. He was seized by another guide, whose personality was much more violent, and he started the treatment of his English patient at once. His immediate area of concern, though, was not the lung, but the woman's throat. Her tonsils must be removed, he said, and set about them with an ordinary pair of scissors. After digging about in her throat for some time, a process which caused her considerable fear and pain, which I could imagine, he told her to spit hard into a tumbler. A mass of tissue and blood was ejected. The operation on the diseased lung came next. An incision was made with a razor blade at right angles to the scar left by the reed, and Lorival applied his mouth to the wound. Ew. Sorry, that one got me. Very gross. Ew. So he sucked very hard and eventually withdrew a dark mass about an inch long. It was placed in the woman's hand and the wound sewn up again with a sewing needle and ordinary thread. No attempt was made at sterilizing the area. Hello, beautiful Sister Sandra. I'm sorry, that last part was grody. Ew. And then he put his mouth on it. And then they didn't sterilize it. Have you guys heard of fight bite? Pretty grody. Ugh. Alright. So the treatment had been rough and painful, and the pain continued for the next day or so, especially in the throat. But she found that she could breathe better than she had done for years. And her whole general level of health improved. As for the tonsils, a later medical examination showed that they had indeed been removed. Not all his healing sessions have ended with success, however, and not all have been held in a friendly atmosphere. His very first visit to London almost ended in disaster through a public meeting. Last-minute changes to the timing of the session had upset the emotional balance, and the continual flashing of flashbulbs in Lorival's face as he worked did not help matters. A woman was operated on for a cataract, and something said to be a lens was removed from her eye. Her subsequent history, though, reported no improvement in her condition. Indeed, the diseased lens was found to be still in place. Another operation did not appear to be too successful either, though this one was interrupted before its close. The patient in this case was a man fatally ill with cancer. Lorival operated on his throat and removed some growths, but the man died a few months afterwards anyway. He might well have recovered if the operation had been allowed to continue, say some of Lorival's followers. Indeed, he might have done. Other cancer operations have been successful in other places at other times. Would this one have been too? One will never know. As it was, it finished in an emotional scene with the surgeon throwing his operating knife into the floor and storming from the building. Most of his healing sessions are very different affairs, though with much music and laughter. In fact, music plays a very important part in the proceedings. Some after the group is complete, Lorival goes into a trance and one of his spirit guides takes over. Music is then used to monitor the mood of the company. If the atmosphere is a little sad, he will sing a cheerful song accompanying himself on the guitar. Too boisterous a mood is quelled with a more wistful melody. Many of those who have been present at one of these meetings have been struck by the insight the man appears to have into their personal lives and problems, an insight which he is able to demonstrate through 2 or 3 simple sentences uttered through an interpreter. The whole process, according to an eyewitness, seems to generate an atmosphere of mutual trust and affection. It is in this highly charged emotional atmosphere that the operations are actually done. Like the shamans of Central Asia, Lorville uses stimulants to heighten his trance state. In his case, the stimulant is alcohol, and it is far from unknown for him to drink half a bottle of whiskey without coming up for air, a feat which could well kill an ordinary man. There is never any trance or trace of the smell of alcohol on his breath, though, and out of the trance he is strictly teetotal. Teetotal. I don't even know what that means. I'll have to look that word up. Very curious. What does he get out of it? It is certainly not material wealth. He has never been known to take money for his treatments, professing himself scared that if he did so, his gift may leave him. If he needs money, he drives his taxi. When not operating, he is shy and self-effacing. He never guarantees to cure anybody, and will say outright if he feels himself to be unable to help a patient. Sometimes he will cure one patient of a particular malady while turning away another suffering from the same complaint, saying that there is nothing he can do for them. Medical genius or charlatan? We will never know. Official assessments of the results of his work are difficult to arrange, for he is operating outside the law and already has a suspended prison sentence hanging over him in his native country. Detailed medical examination of any removed growths is difficult too, because he says that his controlling spirits insist that all such matter is destroyed at the end of every session to prevent the evil in it from spreading. If he is a charlatan, he is a charlatan with a success rate which would do credit to most orthodox surgeons. Whatever he is, one thing is certain: Lorville de Freitas is no ordinary man. I just wanted to see what that button did. Alright, so we're on to the next chapter. And this one is called Practitioners and Prophets. And the first story is Daniel Douglas Home. Not Douglas, but Douglas. The latter half of the 19th century can truthfully be called the heyday of the medium. Tables turned, spirits rapped out messages, flowers fell from the air, unearthly music was played, bells rang of their own accord, and ghostly visitors arrived. Victorian society loved spiritualists and flocked to seances. The fame of well-known mediums was international, and they were welcomed in the homes and courts of the great. Many were fakes, of that there is no doubt. And there is also no doubt that many who did have some inexplicable powers gave the spirits a little help when they failed to come up to the expectations of the sitters. Gadgets and wires, which would produce spirit wraps and turntables, were openly advertised, with the result that the whole fraternity came under suspicion, and every successful medium was the center of controversy. The Society of Psychical Research, the first body to undertake research into various supernatural phenomenon in a thorough and scientific fashion, was not founded until 1882. And the society gradually developed more and more stringent and foolproof methods for testing and genuineness of various phenomenon. It is an interesting fact that there are comparatively few mediums active today. Despite the doubts and scandals that periodically rocked the faith of the spiritualists, many mediums continued for years to confuse their critics and delight their supporters. One of these, and perhaps the most famous of the Victorian era, known as the king, these pages are sticking together, of mediums, was Daniel Douglas Home. Like most other mediums, he had his supporters and detractors. Men of science such as Faraday and Huxley denied that he had any supernatural powers. Other of almost equal eminence such as Crookes and De Morgan believed in them. Home caused some noisy, the neighbors heard them, matrimonial tiffs between the celebrated Brownings, Elizabeth, who stoutly supported him, and Robert, who angrily scoffed. But he was a welcome guest in the courts of Europe, and the perpetrator of one of the most famous and remarkable acts to be performed by a medium, levitation. Levitation has always been one of the supernatural phenomenon reported as having been achieved by mystics and mediums throughout history. Saint Francis of Assisi and Saint Teresa are both believed to have levitated, but perhaps the most famous of all was the monk Saint Joseph of Cupertino, who was born in 1603 and whose flights were witnessed by hundreds of people, from villagers and monks to the Pope himself. St. Joseph's story is worth recording briefly, since it is both colorful and supported by a wealth of evidence. Joseph was a notable ascetic who indulged in extreme mortification of the flesh. When he was only about 25, stories of his supernatural powers led to his examination by the Inquisition, and it was then that his first recorded levitation took place. He had been given permission by the Holy Office to say Mass in the Inquisition's own church. When it was over, he retreated to a corner of the church to pray, then suddenly rose into the air and, upright and with his arms outstretched as though he were on a cross, flew over the heads of the astonished congregation to land on the altar. There he remained for a few moments, unscathed by the flames of the candle, before flying back to his corner, this time in a kneeling position. The Inquisition fortunately decided that his gifts came from God and not from the devil, and he was sent to Rome, where he had an audience for the Pope. Gripped by pious excitement as he stood before Urban VIII, Joseph drifted upwards and remained suspended in the air in an attitude of respect and prayer for more than a minute. The Pope, much impressed, promised that he himself would testify to the truth of the incident. Joseph was then sent to Assisi, where, however, the abbot was not so impressed and warned him not to get up to his tricks. Joseph became so wretched that his plight came to the ears of the superior of his order, who sent for him. When Joseph got back to Assisi after a short stay in Rome, he found a large crowd waiting to greet him in the basilica of the monastery. Delighted to be back in his beloved church, Joseph uttered a loud cry and rose from the ground, alighting gently after a short flight. During his flights, which were watched, usually unknown by Joseph, by numerous royal and eminent persons, Joseph appeared to go into an ecstatic trance. There are records of him landing on laden tables or altars without disturbing the things which lay upon them, and of once perching on a branch which would not bear the weight of an ordinary man. The numerous tales of his levitations are incredible, but it is impossible to assume that they were all the result of mass hallucinations, nor, as he has been suggested, that Joseph was simply an outstanding athlete whose leaps caused such excitement that they were magnified to extremes. Joseph's already delicate health must have been considerably undetermined by the mortification he continually practiced. The evidence of the scores of often skeptical witnesses was given to the truth of St. Joseph's levitations on some 60 occasions. But it all happened 300 years ago, and there was a tendency to treat the credulities expressed by our ancestors with some indulgence. Daniel Douglas Holmes' levitations were by no means so spectacular and were witnessed by a handful rather than hundreds of people. But the evidence has been examined and sifted over and over again by all kinds of people, and still no satisfactory conclusions have been reached. Daniel Douglas Holmes was born in 1883 in a small village near Edinburgh of working-class parents. He claimed, sometimes, that his father was a natural son of the Earl of Home, whose second title was Baron Douglas, and his name was often pronounced and spelt Hume in the style of that family. When he was a child, he was taken by his mother to America, where he lived with an aunt in Connecticut. As a youth, he had one or two visions, or presentiments, which proved correct and which included that of the death of his mother. But when the house began to resound with mysterious raps, his aunt, much annoyed, sent for a clutch of local clergy to exorcise the devil, or whatever it was which possessed the boy. Their efforts, however, failed, and the aunt, tired of what she insisted were the boy's tricks, turned him out of her house. He was then about 19 years old, and was fortunate enough to be taken into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Hayden, who ran a thriving business as fully fledged mediums. The spiritualist cult was then just beginning to get underway in America, its birthplace. But Daniel's talent proved to be even greater than that of his benefactors, and the business throve even more. It was during this period that a sitter at a séance gave the first account of him being lifted up in the air. The account was ecstatic and far from well authenticated, but it brought publicity in its wake and started Daniel Home on his life's work. During the whole of his career, Home never accepted money for demonstrations of his psychic or spiritual powers, relying on gifts and the generosity of friends with whom he lived to provide for his needs. He was never physically robust, and when he was 22 years old, he developed a mild form of tuberculosis and was told that he must go to Europe for treatment. Friends raised money for him, but he arrived in London to find himself without friends and almost penniless. Luck, or the spirits, directed him to a hotel in London, the proprietor of which was interested in spiritualism. When Daniel demonstrated his powers, his host was so delighted that he invited Daniel to remain at the hotel as a guest and introduced him to London society. At this time, spiritualism had only fairly recently arrived from America and was still a new and fashionable religion. Daniel was immediately in demand. His powers attracted the attention of all kinds of people among society and to the intelligentsia, and he was invited to live with a lawyer and his wife in Ealing. Like all mediums before and since, Home was the center of controversy between, on the other hand, convinced believers who enthusiastically described the way he had been able to move tables and make them float about, bells ring, flowers land on people's heads, and an accordion play, and on the other hand, skeptics who pointed out that popular conjurers like Maskelyne, who was a current favorite, could do exactly the same thing. Some, including Robert Browning, claimed to have detected Home an actual fraud. Excuse me. Others declared it was impossible. Home himself, like most mediums, accepted all this as an inevitable adjunct to his powers and remained for the most part calm and aloof, only occasionally protesting at some particularly unfair attack. Home continued to refuse to take money for his seances and allowed certain conditions to be imposed when he worked. His popularity grew. He visited Paris, where he met Madame Blavatsky, who worked with him for a while, and became a favorite of the Empress Eugenie, making many visits to the Tuileries Palace. He left Paris under a somewhat mysterious cloud, although the Empress continued to show him favor in later visits and traveled through Europe. In Rome, he met the daughter of an aristocratic Russian family and, despite his delicate health, lack of family and money, was allowed by her family to marry her. The success of his seances he held at the Tsar's court ensured his welcome there, and his wife's income ensured a new pecuniary independence for Home, who was also by now possessor of an impressive collection of jewelry given to him by grateful clients. Eventually, Home returned to England with his wife and their child and again settled down in London. However, by now there was a good deal of competition from other mediums, and Home's own fame was given a much-needed boost when, once again, it was reported that, at a seance, he had been levitated. According to a witness, he had risen from his chair to a height of 4 or 5 feet above the heads of the people in the room and floated to and fro. Meanwhile, an accordion also floated about on its own, playing unearthly music. This report, published in Soberly Victorian magazine, immediately aroused the usual burst of controversial argument, while some witnesses pointed out that the room was in an almost total darkness and others busily explained just how the trick was done. The editor of Punch, a determined skeptic, published a poem of which the first verse ran, "Through humbugs and fallacies though we may roam, be they never so artful, there's no case like Home. With a lift from the spirits he'll rise in the air, though as lights are put out, we can't see him there." And Thackeray, the editor of the journal which published the account of the levitation, was much berated. Home's fame, however, continued, and his supporters remained staunch. The spiritualists continued to flourish, although Home, among the others, suffered setbacks, sometimes being caught out in minor frauds, and refused the serious attention of such bodies as the Royal Society, which Home had invited to investigate his powers. Home's wife, always delicate, died, and her family refused his claim to her income. Home took to lecturing and poetry reading to make money and for quite a while gave very few seances. He found himself in real trouble when a rich elderly lady, having been instructed via Home by the spirit voice of her dead husband to hand over considerable sums of money to the medium, thought better of the idea and successfully sued for the return of her gifts on the grounds that she had been unduly influenced by Home. What an ass. Regardless of these unpleasant events, Home's friends continued loyal, among them being one who became a witness of the most famous of Home's phenomena, which is always mentioned in connection with his name, a levitation par excellence. This incident took place in 1868, and has generally been accepted as being proved without a doubt since the 3 witnesses were of high social standing, a fact which would have considerably less significance today. For some time, Daniel Home had been a friend of Lord Adair, son of the Earl of Dunraven, whom he had met in Paris. Adair and a friend, Lord Lindsay, who later became president of the Royal Astronomical Society and a fellow of the Royal Society, spent a good deal of time with Home, and the two young men, Adair was 27 and Lindsay only 21 at the time of the levitation, with a Captain Charles Wayne, a cousin's son 5 years older of Adair, often sat in at seances with Home. Adair and Lindsay went to considerable trouble to record their experiences during these seances, and after the remarkable levitation, both wrote separate accounts of the incident. One evening, according to the account of Lord Adair, he and Charlie Wine went round to the house where Home was staying, and there found him with Lord Lindsay. Home proposed a sitting. Adair reports that they all sat round a table in a small room. There was no light in the room, but the light from the window was sufficient to enable them to see each other in the different articles of furniture. At this period, the spirit of Ada Isaacs Mentken, a staunch spiritualist who, as Mazeppa, riding the wild horse of Tartary, had been a star of Astley Circus and who had recently died in Paris, often visited the seances held by Home. On this particular December night, Home went into a kind of trance and walked about uneasily. According to Adair, he was both elongated and raised in the air, phenomenon which apparently were not unusual. He then said to his friends, "Do not be afraid, and on no account leave your places," and he went out into the passage. Lord Lindsay then suddenly said, "Oh, good heavens! I know what he is going to do. It is too fearful. I cannot tell you. It is too horrible." However, at this point, Ada's spirit took a hand, and Lindsay reported that she had told him to tell the others. "He is going out of the window in the other room and coming in at this window." Adair continues, "We heard Home go into the next room, heard the window thrown up, and presently Home appeared standing upright outside our window. He opened the window and walked in quite coolly. 'Ah,' he said, 'you were good this time,' referring to our having sat still and not wished to prevent him. He sat down and laughed." Charlie asked why he was laughing, and Home replied that he had thought how astonished a passing policeman would have been if he had looked up and seen a man turning round and round in the air along the wall. He then told Adair to shut the window in the next room. I got up, shut the window, and in coming back remarked that the window was not raised a foot, and that I could not think how he had managed to squeeze through. He rose and said, "Come and see." I went with him. He told me to open the window as it was before. I did so. He told me to stand a little distance off. He then went through the open space, head first, quite rapidly, his body being nearly horizontal and apparently rigid. He came in again, feet foremost, and we returned to the other room. It was so dark I could not see clearly how he was supported outside. He did not appear to grasp or rest upon the balustrade, but rather to be swung out and in. Outside each window is a small balcony or ledge, 19 inches deep, bounded by stone balustrades, 18 inches high. The balustrades of the two windows are 7 feet 4 inches apart, measuring from the nearest points. A string course, 4 inches wide, runs between the windows at the level of the bottom balustrade, and another 3 inches wide at the level of the top. Between the window at which Home went out and that of which he came in, the wall recedes 6 inches. The rooms are on the 3rd floor. As so often happens in these cases, there are irritating, inexplicable, and quite often quite irrelevant discrepancies in the accounts given of the event at the time and later. Adair contradicted himself over both the date and the venue of the séance, and although at the time Adair got his friends to read his account of the event and agree that the details were accurate. When Lindsay, and the many years later Wynne, described the levitation, the details given again did not tally in such manners as the light in the room, the position in which the men were sitting, and so on. However, all three men agree in the fact that Daniel Douglas' home floated in and out of the windows 3 stories above the ground. Investigation into the mystery has continued enthusiastically ever since, and various explanations of it have been put forward, for as someone pointed out, man would rather believe in a lie than a miracle. The house was placed by later investigations in Ashley Place near Victoria, although there is some slight doubt even as to this, and the stone balconies described by Adair have vanished, being replaced by wrought iron after bomb damage during the Second World War. It has been suggested that Home, who is known to have had a good head for heights, could have climbed from one balcony to another, edging along the string cords, or that he could have previously fixed clamps to the wall, which he later removed. It has also been suggested that, over a long period, he had conditioned his observers to believe that what they saw that December night, by discussing with them the whole question of levitation, by forecasting levitation, and on one occasion, by standing outside the window at Ashley House, which had given his friends considerable concern for his safety. Nobody, however, has ever explained why Home should have carried out such a dangerous trick, for he obtained no pecuniary benefit from it. Adair and his friends were merely puzzled and intrigued, and not long afterwards the association between Home and Adair gradually became less close. Another incident of levitation was reported soon after the one at Ashley House, when at a luncheon party given by Lord Carnarvon, Home was said to have levitated himself again, floating out of one window and in at another, and alighting breathless and trembling. The story was told by a guest at the luncheon in a letter to a newspaper, but no other witness ever came forward. Home, meanwhile, went on with his routine life, with increasing competition from other, often fraudulent mediums. He took to his travels again and married another aristocratic Russian lady. Eventually, when his tubercular lungs gave him cause for alarm, he left England for the sake of his health. He eventually settled in Switzerland, where he lived in a modest pension with his wife. His powers gradually failed, and he held fewer and fewer seances. He made a little money from literary work and wrote another volume of his reminiscence, The Lights and Shadows of Spiritualism, in which he considerably annoyed fellow mediums by exposing many of the tricks of the trade. But his health grew considerably worse. Somewhat belatedly, his wife took him to Paris to consult with a specialist, and there in 1886 he died, and was buried in a cemetery of Saint-Germain. On his gravestone was inscribed, Daniel Douglas Home, born to earth, life near Edinburgh, Scotland, March 20th, 1833. Born to spirit life, June 21st, 1886. Faithful spiritualists still visit his grave, and within it still lies the secret of the famous levitation. So on this note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our first musical break. On this break, we have Miss Tracy Cruz, and she is from Oakland, California. She's going to be singing Joyful Rain. Then we have the beautiful, talented Miss Michaela Hay from Ontario, Canada, and she's going to be singing Devil You Know, Pins and Needles, as well as Mirror. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Talking on pins and needles, every word through microscope. You keep stomping down on the ground while I've been stuck on this tightrope. I just wanna say what I wanna say without your sentence. I'm not willing to do the time when I'm innocent, and I'm innocent. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. Your blowtorch at my feet. You won't ever see me beg, so take this tongue off your leash. I'm gonna say what I wanna say, don't need permission. Interpret it how you want, it's my decision. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. Dancing on shattered glass, kicking the pieces all around. My safety has been broken, this is now a hunting ground. Talking on pins and needles. Talking on pins and needles. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna hang it up, hang it up, hang it up. And I'm done, and I'm done, and I'm done, done, done. I'm gonna
Well, the way that song ends, you think it would just go, but it's like, snap! This song is over. That's all you get. But that's our 2-0 girls. We have Miss Tracy Cruz from Oakland, California, and Miss Michaelan Hay from Ontario, Canada. I had to mute there for a second because I was speaking in Belgium. Not Belgium, but Belgium. That's not bad manners. That's just good beer. So that was a good musical break. I don't know. I talked to Mia earlier. We were going to do a show today. She thought I was talking about Sunday. And today is her old man's birthday. That's pretty exciting. We've got a lot of birthdays going on. So my daughter turned 22 yesterday. Miss Mackenzie Thomas. 22. And she's gonna have a baby in February. She's gonna make me a granny. Grammy. Mima. Mama. I still don't even know what to call myself. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the whole baby thing. I've even been having weird dreams about people being upset about that, and I'm just like, I don't know. Okay, so she told me after babysitting Nova throughout the years and, you know, being fed up with kids, I'm never having kids. And I'm like, you know, when you find the right one, eventually, you're going to have some babies. She's like, nope, not me. I'm never having kids. And here we are. Now we got a little Archer William Avery coming in. With a vengeance. This guy, tell you what, he is going to make people rue the day they were born. He's going to be the cutest little baby ever. And Sandra's over there. She's going to be a grandmother too. So my Canadian sister, Miss Sandra Heath, the seamstress, the meanest seamstress I've ever known, she's over there sewing baby clothes. And I still haven't even bought any baby outfits. Okay, so I found one of Floyd's old sweatshirts that I think he wore once. And it's got a monster truck on it and stuff. So I have that in a pile of clothes for her and the baby. And then she came and showed us some really cute baby clothes the other day with little dinosaurs and stuff. And Sandra, there's this cutest little baby hat with the little dinosaur spikes coming off the back. And then, you know, the little onesie matched it. It was so cute. So we're getting ready for winter baby stuff. So especially like if you're a knitter, when I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, I learned how to knit, but I only knew how to knit in a straight line. So I would make like garland for the Christmas tree and stuff like that. But I never knew how to knit like a hat or a sweater, you know, stockings, something like that. I could never do that. Aww. Sandra said she bought some Hello Kitty slippers. Well, she's got a little granddaughter coming, and I got a little grandson. Oh my goodness. They're going to be so cute, so precious. We're going to have some... We're going to have to start our own little pages, and, I don't know. I'm always trying to get Sandra to be like, hey, Sandra, you could, like, make all these clothings and stuff. I think baby clothes is your forte. And we should, like, make our little grandkids models for your clothing line. But then it's like, you gotta do all these little small clothing. And for me, like, small things with my hands cause my hands to cramp up. So maybe that would be harder to do than adult clothes. I don't know. I'm always pushing her to do a clothing line. And she's like, no, I've done enough clothes in my life. And here she is, like, heartfully sewing things. But yeah. Oh my gosh, Kinsey and Gabe, 2 of the most beautiful kids I've ever laid eyes upon, are having a little baby. And, you know, they have my jeans, you know, shining my nails. They're going to have a beautiful baby, and oh my gosh, I'm going to be a slave to it. So maybe that's why I'm not doing it now. I'm just like waiting. I'm abiding my time and waiting for the boot to drop, but... More fiddly. Yeah, the only cool thing, well, okay, I take that back. Not the only cool thing. Cool thing number 1, I'm having a grandbaby. Cool thing number 2, this grandbaby should be born on my Uncle Daddy Rex's birthday, which is February 13th is the due date. Day before Valentine's Day. And a lot of people would talk about Netflix and chill before COVID hit. And then my cousin Latanya was like, COVID and chill. And now she's got the most, oh my gosh, this little boy, he's my little travel buddy. They're like, guess what? You're going to be in the back seat with this newborn baby that is a booby baby. And we're going to try to drive 8 hours to get to this certain place without any incident. And when it first started off, you know, we're kind of rigged. We're trying to get our groove going. And it's just like, he's upset and he's crying, so then I'm upset because I don't know what to do with him, and I can't give him my nipple, you know, because there's no milk coming out of there, and I'm not going to do that anyways, because that's weird. But then eventually, you know, I get him on my shoulder, whole mommy stance, his butt kind of pooched up in the air. You got to hold your arm a certain way where the butt pooches out, so they're kind of in a little fetal position, and then you just pat the bottom, pat the bottom, pat the bottom. And that guy, swear to God, slept the whole way after the first 30 minutes. And my cousin Latanya was like, hey, how about we pull over here and I can feed him? I was like, bitch, baby's sleeping right now. If baby wakes up and needs a diaper change or needs your noonie, he will let you know. Leave the baby alone. But we did stop for one diaper change and a little noonie feed, but otherwise she kept trying to pull over. I was like, no, he's perfectly fine, he's happy, let him go, we're gonna finish this. Anywho's, I think I've killed enough time with grandbaby talk. Oy vey. The next song, I want to say song, next story we have going is about Uri Geller, and this is a name that I actually recognize. Baby love next year. I know, Sandra. It's going to be bad. We're going to be addicted. We're going to be smelling the baby's head like 1,000,000 times per day. Sorry, I had to hit my vape. Alright, so Uri Geller. Uri Geller, shaman, magician, or miracle worker. That is the conundrum posed to scientists by public performances and private examinations of his powers, which seem to be out of this world. Geller became a widely discussed figure in Britain and the United States after giving TV demonstrations of his ability to bend at will metal objects like teaspoons, fork, and keys without touching them, as well as stopping and restarting wristwatches, although the wearers were many miles away from him. Geller is 27 years old, handsome, and quick to smile. He favors the current long hairstyle, but is clean-shaven. He has no precise explanation for himself, but thinks he may be an avatar from outer space, assigned to us Earthlings from the world of flying saucers. He is aware of certain similarities with Jesus Christ, but does not claim to be his reincarnation. Once, he says, he changed a thin rose wine into one resembling a rich burgundy. In a magazine, sorry. I'm thinking about birth. In a MAGA birth. Just kidding. It's a magazine. Alright. In a magazine interview, he remarked that the Israelis put Jesus' date of birth as 20 December, which happens to be Geller's birthday date too. Possibly just a coincidence, he said, but I believe that Jesus had powers, and so did Moses and all those other wise men of history. It is, however, doubtful if Jesus would have become a paratrooper in the Israeli army, as Geller did. It is also doubtful if Geller would have won such instant recognition in the Western world had not the highly respected scientist of the Stanford Research Institute decided to investigate his powers and, having done so during 5 weeks of carefully constructed laboratory tests, admitted that they had not been able to find a normal scientific explanation and that Geller requires further study. The Stanford Research Institute is a large organization engaged in research work for the United States government as well as for major companies in many parts of the world. The statement that it believes Geller deserves... that it believes Geller deserves a deeper investigation is not only a tribute to his manifestations, but is also a sign of an increased respectability of the world area of parapsychology in our space age. The Institute, which is quite separate from Stanford University, has its headquarters in Menlo Park near San Francisco and has been testing 2 Americans who appear to have gifts similar to Uri Geller's. It has been, to say the least, embarrassed by subsequent publicity surrounding Geller and is being extremely careful not to jump to any conclusions in his case. Reporting last year on its investigations into Geller and one other unnamed person, the scientists Dr. Harold Puthoff and Mr. Russell Targ said, "We do not claim that either of these men has psychic powers. We draw no sweeping conclusions as to the nature of these phenomenon or the need to call them psychical. We have observed certain phenomenon with the subjects for which we have no scientific explanation. All we can say at this point is that further investigation is clearly warranted. Our work is only in preliminary stages." A film was made of the Geller experiments by SRI, and here is a summary of the Institute's account of 3 tests. Dice box. A double-blind experiment was performed in which a single die was placed in a closed metal box. This box was heartily shaken by one of the researchers and placed on a table. The subject, aka Geller, then had to look at the box without touching it and call out which die face he believed was uppermost. He gave the correct answer each of the 8 times the experiment was performed. The probability that this could have occurred by chance is approximately 1 in a million. Picture drawing. In this test, simple pictures were drawn on 3x5 cards at a time when Geller was not at the Institute. The pictures were put into double-sealed envelopes by an outside assistant, not associated with the experiment. The subject made 7 almost exact reproductions with no errors. Hidden object. 10 identical aluminum film cans were placed in a row by an outside assistant not associated with the research. The experimenters, who were not themselves aware which can contain the object, would then enter the room with the subject, who would either pass his hand over the row of cans or simply look at them. He would then call out the cans he felt confident were empty. An experimenter would remove them from the row. When only 2 or 3 cans remained, the subject would announce which one he thought contained the target object. This task was performed 12 times without error. The probability that this could have occurred by chance is approximately 1 in a million. Actually, 1 in a trillion this time. Sorry. The researchers say they have no hypothesis at this point as to whether this is a heightened sensitivity of some normal sense or whether it is some supernatural sense that Geller possesses. They are convinced that the experiments they conducted were virtually fraud-proof, but they add cautiously, "A film never proves anything." Rather, this film gives us the opportunity to share with the viewer observations of phenomena that, in our estimation, deserve further study. A second group of tests was carried out in the field of psychokinesis and included Gaylor's apparent facility in bending spoons, nails, and other metal objects, although he apparently performed less well in laboratory conditions than he does in public. He did, it seems, bend some spoons and buckle some rings, but not until he touched them. Two of his manifestations did impress the scientists. In one, he succeeded in moving the needle of the magnometer, which measures magnetic fields, without touching it at all. In the other, he is said to have raised and lowered a scale which was completely enclosed inside an aluminum can and a glass cylinder. The scientists reported that, in several experiments, Gaylor improved his performance as he went on. With the film containers, for instance, he had to pass his hand over them before making his selection, but he did this less and less. Conditions for these tests were made as rigorous as possible. Indeed, several experiments were eliminated because it was felt that trickery could have been possible. The most important aspect of the Stanford investigation was that it was, unlike a public performance, always under the control of the scientists who had worked out several devices to eliminate any chance of Gaylor's cheating. All right, pause. I'm going to call a pause or a safe, when you're playing tag as a kid. But, okay, so the last story we read, this fella would do this in parties where a lot of these people had the belief in what was going on. And I think with scientists, you have a more structured mind. You have somebody that is picking things apart and is more skeptical and waiting for the result or different results to make a hypothesis. So I think really the energy of a group can really help with something like this. If a lot of people believe in it, it's more easy flowing. If there's more people that don't and they're waiting for scientific results, it's going to be harder or a harsher outcome. I don't know. That's just how I feel personally. All right, let's see if we can find where we were before. So Gaylor was by no means an easy subject and did not fit easily into the bare clinical conditions of a laboratory, but once a rapport had been established, he appeared to cooperate to the satisfaction of the scientists, who were keen that he return for further series of tests at Menlo Park. Every time he was put to a test, they reported he was reluctant to involve himself completely and do what was asked. But like I'm saying, like with more energy, it's easier. With his own energy, it's going to be harder for him. And doing like the whole party scene, he's got to learn a whole new way of doing it, which will derive more power from him. But hey, more power to him. Jeez, Pete, this guy's pretty awesome. Okay, so every time he was put to a test, they reported he was reluctant to involve himself completely and do what was asked. He had to be coaxed. When it turned out that he had succeeded, he seemed genuinely delighted at his performance, even surprised. Because he's used to doing the party scene, like I just said. On that note, I need a drink of my New Belgium Voodoo Ranger IPA. This is not an Imperial IGA, so it's only 7%. The other one I usually have is 7.9, I think. Or is it a 9? I don't know. But it's still really good. And it's got carbonation, which, gives me vitality. Anywho's, I need to wet the whistle. If you need to do so as well, go ahead. Or take a hit off your bong. Or that bone you're holding. Or that bowl you've been nursing all day. So the Stanford scientists concede that, First and foremost, Gaylor is a showman, an entertainer, and he may very well use some tricks of the trade to put himself over to his public. But this does not mean that he does not also have the special powers which he claims, even if they do not always work with the same force. Dr. Harold Puthoff, one of the two investigators, twice allowed Geller to drive him blindfold. Neither drive, of course, qualified as a controlled experiment. Nevertheless, Dr. Puthoff was impressed. Geller drove so fast along winding roads that a following car could not keep up with him. Dr. Puthoff points out that some people are extremely good at seeing through blindfolds unless an opaque bag is placed over the subject's head and tied at the neck. Oh my gosh. Dr. Puthoff says, you can't be 100% certain that the subject is not cheating. Gaylor was first spotted when giving a party turn in Israel by Dr. Adriha Paharich, author of The Sacred Mushroom, who has now written a book about Uri's powers. It is a fact, says Paharich, that there is an outer space intelligence that exists independently of any form we know. This intelligence operates through Uri and around Uri. This is the bare truth. My problem is to define this intelligence. That is why he has written the book, which makes some remarkable claims for Geller. One theory it advances is that Uri manages to avert a Third World War. I can't substantiate it fully, says Paharich, because it involves so many people in Washington, Cairo, Tel Aviv, Moscow, elsewhere, but a good case can be made. Dr. Paharich, who claims that he wouldn't put his seal on anything that wasn't true, declares that Geller often causes things to materialize and claims that he once traveled to Brazil by astral projection while lying on his bed in Paharich's home in Asinang. Sorry, my page slipped out of my fingers. Asinang, near New York, and as proof he brought back 1,000 Cruzeiro note. He and Gaylor have apparently seen many flying saucers and have had many conversations in English with the occupants of the saucer, which Paharich calls is or is. Is it is or is in all caps? Is. Probably is, short for intelligence in the sky. In his book on Geller, he quotes some of these talks verbatim, including one in which he was told that he and Uri had been chosen by IS computers as the perfect ideal mean to do IS's work on Earth. IS claims to have been the force behind Moses and Jesus. Oh, that's interesting. Pause on the book. Alright, so I've mentioned this several times in my different shows, and, you know, you have the Mother Mary holding the little baby Jesus, and there's all these buildings of period time around them, and then in the background you see these UFOs having a freaking world war in the skies behind them, and she's just smiling because she knows everything's gonna be okay, and her little baby's so happy, and there's a fucking UFO war going on in the background. Seriously. I think that's kind of what they're talking about right now. Is it not? I don't know. We shall see, my friends. So another strong supporter of Geller is Captain Agar Mitchell, who went to the moon with Apollo 14 in 1971. He caused something of a sensation by trying out a number of psychic experiments in outer space. He has no doubts at all about Uri's gift, and, indeed, believes that they are an extreme example of capacities that exist to a greater or lesser extent in everyone. Yes, boys and girls, guess what? We're all of an alien being. We're all deposited here by aliens, eh? I don't know. That's what some people say. Yep. Pretty crazy. Here, argues Captain Mitchell, is a whole new era of human consciousness which had long been unrecognized and now needs thorough exploration. But the most effective of Geller's supporters is Judith Skutch, president of the Foundation of Parasensory Investigation, which is based in her large New York apartment. Oh my gosh. We're based out of a large New York apartment. That's kind of where we hang out with Champ every weekend, eh? Oh. That is where Geller gives most of his private demonstrations, and it is this foundation which has put up the money to pay for Stanford's further study of Geller. Mrs. Skutch admits that Yuri is marked show business impulses. She herself lays no claim to psychic powers, but she makes this point. I don't know why everyone assumes we are the center of intelligence in the universe. Flying saucers to me make absolute sense. How did it all begin? Yuri Geller was born in Hungary and apparently became aware of certain powers when he was 3 years old. I could guess the numbers on playing cards, he has said. At school, 4 years later, he could make the hands on the wristwatch move simply by concentrating on them. His father died when he was 9, and his mother, Miss Margaret Geller, decided to make a new life for herself and her son on a kibbutz in Israel, where Yuri went to boarding school. There, according to fellow pupils, he kept dabbling in magic. After school, he did his army service as a paratrooper. That over, he earned a living in Tel Aviv as a male model, his specialty being modeling underwear. Ooh la la. Well, you dirty, dirty bird. The breakthrough came for him when he decided to go on stage. He asked the Israeli trade union group, Histadrut, for a contract to entertain at their social centers. They sent him to an astrologer and student of the occult, Mrs. Aviva Stan, who was a Histadrut lecturer. At her home in Tel Aviv, Uri gave a demonstration to Miss Stan and 4 of her friends. That was in the autumn of 1969. Woot woot. Miss Stan's verdict? What could it be? He was a thoroughly charming young man, handsome and well-mannered, but his demonstration, we thought, was pathetic. He could see we were not impressed by what he was doing, so he asked one of the girls present if he could borrow her ring, saying he could snap metals. Then he went into the kitchen for a glass of water, and when he came out, he had snapped the ring. We all suspected that he had used a small pair of pliers. I felt sorry for him, but I recommended that Histadrut should not offer him a contract. However, soon after this unsuccessful audition, a theatrical manager, Mickey Pellicht, decided that he had what it takes to charm audiences, so he took Yuri under his wing, polished up his act, and hired a publicity girl to promote him. This girl, Mrs. Miri Zikroni, has said recently, I always thought he was using trickery, but Yuri himself believes absolutely what he was. He believed he was a Superman. Knowing his confidence in his own powers, I found it much easier to sell him to people as a man in touch with supernatural influences. Geller got his first show business break through Shmuel Shai, usually described as Israel's David Frost, who first gave him a spot on his stage show at the Sheraton Hotel in Tel Aviv, then later featured him on his TV show and radio shows. According to Shai, he went to grass so well that in no time everyone here was talking about Yuri Geller. This popularity, of course, brought him plenty of space in the newspapers. Geller had made around 1,000 appearances in newspapers. And Geller had made 1,000 appearances in Israel as well when American tourists saw his fact and brought him to the attention of Captain Mitchell, the sixth man to land on the moon, who sent a scientist to check him out. That led to appearances in the United States. Geller made his first public appearance in Britain on a David Dimbleby TV talk show in 23 November 1973. Millions saw him break a steel fork just by stroking it and will a broken watch to mend itself. The following day, the whole country was agog with his feats. He became a 5-day wonder for the national newspapers, which vied with each other to take him up, and he sparked off a fascinating correspondence in The Times. One reader wrote, "Uri Geller has demonstrated in public that he has unusual powers to bend metal by a thought. Now that there is a trend for people to go back into history further than ever before, surely it will soon be realized that these powers are only lost and waiting to be rediscovered. Take, for instance, the tradition among Easter Islands that their fantastic statues moved in place of their own accord. King Arthur's so-called wizard Merlin was ascribed power to move standing stones. Again, when a scientist is going to involve and to solve mystery of perpetual light, Plutarch wrote in the 1st century AD that he had seen a perpetual lamp in the temple of Jupiter, and that the priests assured him that it had burned continually for many years. Neither wind nor water could extinguish it, or the cold jungle lights seen by the natives in the lost cities of Mateo Gos, jungle, who related to circumstances of Colonel F.P. Fawcett. Where did they come from? Again, what was the source of the incandescent atmospheres in the spheres discovered in the jungle valley in New Guinea, populated by Amazon women? Numa Pompilius was credited with the ability to light altar fires without aids. Elijah also did this in the famous passage in the First Kings. This fascinating character also had foreknowledge of his own disappearance from the earth when he was removed from it by some sort of aircraft, and from earth when he was removed from it, and his successor Elisha declared it was no use sending out a search party of 50 men to find him. They searched fruitlessly for 3 days, and Elisha simply remarked, "Did I not tell you not to go?" The world is packed with clues. Surely it is time our society took these things seriously and started to explore the massive evidence existing of incredible highly evolved technology in technological societies existing in the very long ago past. This letter was followed by one from Lord Corvidale, writing from Christ's Hospital, Horsham, Sussex. There is a time for skepticism, and there is a time for sense. I might argue, if I choose, that Antarctica does not exist. I have not been there. I have met no one who has been there. If I did, I should not believe him. The sagas we have been told, the maps that have been printed, are part of the gigantic mistake or a dark conspiracy. I shall wait for more valid and solid evidence. I shall wait in vain. So too will the men of science who chase the rainbow's end, devising ever more foolproof tests for such as Uri Geller. For them no evidence is going to be enough. At the moment when we may be on the verge of some of the most exciting discoveries about the nature of the mind and matter ever made, it is disheartening to see many who, training, are best equipped to investigate such happenings, looking resolutely the other way, convinced, presumably, of their intrinsic impossibility. Too many promising investigations have now been snuffed out, or have died from the lack of support, or fear, or ridicule. Galileo's discoveries were embarrassing at the time, but they did not put an end to the activities of good scientists. If Uri Geller is indeed able to make broken watches tick again, might he not, as others have shown they can, succeed in doing the same for human beings? In the face of such possibilities, it is high time to temper skepticism with a rather keener spirit of scientific adventure. Geller, of course, has plenty of detractors. Chief among these is Time magazine, which summed him up as a questionable nightclub magician. Leon Giroff wrote the Time article apparently that argues that there has never been a single adequately documented psychic phenomenon. Many people believe in things like this, he writes, because they need to. From the moment J. Roth heard of Geller's supposed powers, he knew Geller had to be a fake, so he set about collecting evidence to support his view. Kind of reminds me of the magician back not too long ago. Remember his name? He would escape from handcuffs and ankle cuffs. Remember that guy? At first, in 1970, he was widely acclaimed, said the magazine. He came under suspicion when a group of psychologists and computer experts from Hebrew University duplicated all of his feats and called him a fraud. He eventually left the country in disgrace. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. I did not. But Benjamin Ron, Israeli Vice Consul for Scientific Affairs in Washington, says that no scientific testing in the scale of SRI experiments has ever or was ever done in Israel, and adds, there is no question in our minds from scientists' viewpoint that there is something in this man, and he dismisses the time account as overblown. Professor Kelson, a physicist at Tel Aviv University and himself an amateur magician, is on record as saying that, after much observation, he is convinced that Geller is an established fraud, but he has never done any laboratory testing. Perhaps the last word should be left with the British weekly, The New Scientist, which has set up an informal committee including 2 members of its staff, a psychologist, a professional magician, and an independent journalist, and has issued a challenge to Geller to appear before this group and demonstrate his powers. Everything the magazine promises will be recorded on videotape, and all results will be published. With a cautious approach of this nature, concludes the New Scientist, it could be the parapsychology will finally undergo a genuinely disinterested study of its validity. Well, that's kind of like a diss in itself, don't you think? Sounds like they're prominently and benefactly and socially acceptably talking shit. So we are at a whole different story here in our book of weird, strange, and otherworldly happenings of the supernatural. So we're going to go to a music break. On this break, we have Miss Tracy Cruz from Oakland, California. She's going to be singing Flowers and Candy, Emotional Love, as well as Electricity. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
When I met you, my life changed. Your love rained all over me. It was blissful, so special, essential. Life poetry, true beauty. We created, we made it. Reality, pure affection with expression. Our connection was meant to be. You make me feel so good inside, like therapy for my mind. You make me feel so good inside. It was like flowers and candy, understanding how you're standing really must be love. I'm talking true, I'm talking real, and I felt it in my heart. It was like flowers and candy, understanding how you're standing really must be love. I'm talking true, I'm talking real, and I felt it in my heart and soul. You make me feel so good inside. You make me feel so good inside.
Now what is this that's happening? I don't even know you anymore. Oh, yeah, changes moving through every day. Yeah, and I don't even know what we're fighting for.
Our bright days turn to sleepless nights. Our loving ways have turned to endless fights, and we can't seem to compromise. We try so hard to make things right. Yesterday we'll erase do? My heart is so confused in the past. It's been put down, it's been shattered, and then I'm left without any clue to know the real truth about what I found. But with you I found my common ground. Your love makes me emotional, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel emotional. You make me feel that love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel emotional. Ever since I was young, my mom said makes you strong when everything goes wrong and you can't go on. I believe the love you have for me surpassed infinity. That's why you're all I see. Your love makes me emotional, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel so emotional. Love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel. Your love makes me emotional. Your love, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel so emotional. Love is real, 'cause you're the one that makes me feel. What you have is magical. We feel so emotional. You move me so I can't let go. I can't let go. You touch my soul, I can't let go. I can't let go. 'Cause what we have is magical. Your love's emotional. Your love makes me emotional. You're the one that makes me feel emotional. Can't you see you do something to me? Oh, I can't let go. You make me feel, your love's emotional, so emotional, so emotional. It feels so real to me. It feels so real to me. It feels so real to me. It feels so real, yeah. Makes me feel, emotional.
Your love empowers me. It gives me the energy to move beyond my capabilities. There is no limit to what your love can do.
I feel chemistry whenever you're close to me, and I cannot explain your energy, 'cause you're pulling me like gravity. It feels so strong.
Oh, yeah. So that was Tracy Cruz from Oakland, California, with Flowers and Candy, Emotional Love, and then Electricity. And those are all thanks to our musical sponsor, Mr. Roy Washington. And he's amazing. Thank you so much, Roy, for letting us use your music and play your friends' music. And man, most of my music that I have is from Roy, and I'm so grateful for it. Yes, we do have some commercials from, I think it's Spreaker, could be YouTube. I believe it's Spreaker. That some people have told me about. I've never witnessed it because I'm on this side of the whole thing, but I'm hoping it's not too much because I really don't like commercials. But I love music, and so I think a good way to pass the time on breaks would be music. But thank you so much once again for joining us on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies, live right now on speaker as well as KPNL, which you can find at kpnl-db.com. And that's KPNL Radio. All right, so moving right along in our book. Every time I read from this book, I'm like, we're going to finish this book tonight. I don't know, we could do it, but I'm thinking we might have a small fraction of this left next time, and then we'll start on a new book. I'm not sure if I want to do Hollywood deaths or whatnot. I have a lot of supernatural books and paranormal books that my grandpa bestowed upon me after he passed that, man, there's so many. We can even talk about Nazis and the Third Reich and all that other stuff. You guys, message me either on Facebook or send me an email on weareparadoxmedia@gmail.com and let me know what you want to hear during story time. Alright, so this next story is called A Divine Gift. Of all the powers which are regarded as supernormal, perhaps the most readily accepted is that of divining, or, as it has been called for centuries in the West Country, dowsing. The existence of this power is, in some people, so well proven that diviners have been employed by organizations such as government departments and businesses, which are not normally given that gullibility. Divining is also a relatively common gift. I once had the opportunity to try it myself, when my uncle, who needed another water supply on his land in Devonshire, sent for the local dowser in much of the same way as you or I might send for the local electrician. He took it for granted that the dowser would find any water that was there. The only concern was whether it would be in a suitable place. Amused by the fascination with which I watched him quartering the fields, the Y-shaped twig he carried occasionally twisted in his hand as it reached to the pool of water. The dowser invited me to have a go. He searched the hedgerows for a stout and suitably shaped twig. Hazel is the conventional wood used, but it is not necessary. Cut it to the size for me, and I walked over the field beside him. The twig held out before me. Nothing happened. When my friend's twig dipped, mine remained inanimate. But when he put his hands over mine, my twig reacted too. Seeing my disappointment, the dowser explained that the water he could feel was apparently both scanty and deep. He led me across a couple of fields and told me to try again. This time, he walked beside me, merely watching. And soon I felt the twig move and then jerk and twist so strongly in my hands that I almost dropped it. It was impossible to hold it still or to control it in any way. The dowser was much entertained by my excitement. He had known that there was water there, plentiful and not very deep, but unfortunately inconveniently situated from my uncle's purpose, and not wanting to influence me in any way, had let me try for myself if I could find it. He told me that, in fact, about 3 people out of 10 could douse, and that if I developed the gift, I could become more sensitive to the existence of water and perhaps other things. We knew when his twig was reacting to some substance that was not water. Hold on, I have to mute for a second. Ugh, I think I need some water. All right, where was I? Oh no. The existence of water and perhaps other things, he knew when his twig was reacting to some substance that it was not water, and he made me hold one fork of his twig while he held the other, so that I could feel for myself the difference between the pool of water and of some other influence. But to tell the truth, I really couldn't. He himself never knew what other things he could feel below the ground, for he was a countryman who appreciated the value of water and who had no ambition than to put his gift at the service of others for a modest fee. He found water in 3 or 4 places on my uncle's land, and at the most suitable a shaft was sunk. A little windmill atop its still tower is still pumping water to this day. Divining is an ancient art, widely practiced throughout Europe. Marco Polo met diviners during his travels in China in the 13th century. It was probably introduced into England according to a book entitled The Divining Rod, which originated from an investigation made by the late Sir William Barrett on behalf of the Society for Psychical Research by German miners who were brought over in the latter part of the 16th century to work the tin mines of Cornwall. The local dowser is still more commonly to be found in the West Country than in other parts of Britain. Water, however, is by no means the only substance a diviner can find. Coal, various metals, oil, and even missing objects or persons have been discovered by diviners, some of who specialize in one or more of these fields. Conventionally, as we have seen, a forked hazel twig was used as a divining rod, but as the art has progressed, a variety of appliances have been developed to amplify what are, basically, the diviner's natural reflexes. They include a pendulum, an angle rod, and a motoscope, a curved double-anger thick wire with a pointer. Many other devices are also used. Even diviner, they all have their preference. While some are able to work only with bare hands, a more exhausting method, however. There is no real explanation of this strange power in some people. Scientists and others who have investigated the subject have come to the conclusion that there is no physical theory to cover the facts. In some manner, the diviner receives a suggestion, perhaps a form of radiation, from a buried substance which indicates its presence in the physical reaction of the appliance he carries. Dowsers work in many different ways to suit themselves, but there are certain phenomena which are common and all too often used. For example, as he approaches the object of his search, the diviner experiences a feeling of strong attraction towards its source. Also, a dowser can usually transmit his gift to another person by touch, or by allowing that a person use his rod. Atmospheric conditions, changes in the Earth's magnetic fields, interruptions which distract the diviner's concentration, and even the wearing of rubber boots can inhibit the sensitivity of the diviner and the reaction of the appliance he carries. Contrary to popular belief, dowsing for minerals was known long before the dowsing for water. Diviners often carry a small sample of the particular metal for which they are searching, and if they change from one type to another, they have first to wash their hands, either in reality or by gestures, to rid themselves of the influence. Dowsing, however, is not confined to water and metals. Many oil companies have employed dowsers, and it is said that coal miners have been known to produce a divining rod to follow a seam. More extraordinary is the dowser's ability to find the lost objects or people. The dowser is given some object owned by the person, and holding this, he is attracted to another object owned by that person. The same method is used to find missing people. The late John Clark of Leicestershire was enormously successful at finding drowned people. Between March and May 1933, he traced the whereabouts of 6 bodies, 5 of which were later recovered. With an object belonging to the missing person, the dowser can follow his trail in such the way that a dog follows a scent. The same techniques can be used in all kinds of fields. Dowsing has helped archaeologists by outlining the limits of a buried building or of a Roman ditch. It has also been used to diagnose disease and pinpoint the actual source of the trouble. It can indicate whether a person is allergic to certain substances. Given the right conditions, the divining rod can be put to a number of purposes. Another remarkable aspect of dowsing is the ability of some dowsers to find metals or water simply from a map. The Reverend H. W. Lee Wilson, who had the gift of dowsing, describes in his book, Practical Dowsing, a Symposium, how he had heard of this method but was completely skeptical. However, he and his nephew, who had just learned to douse, decided to try it. They made a rough plan of the tennis court, following instructions in the book and pinpointed reactions which they got from it. Then they went outside to check their results and found that there was underground water in the exact places marked on the map. "We couldn't understand it," said Mr. Lee Wilson, "but it worked." Many dowsers do in fact use this method, and neither they nor anyone else have been able to explain it. It is obviously of considerable practical value, and the dowser usually employs a pendulum instead of a conventional rod, since it leaves one hand free to mark the areas where some reaction was found. This method of dowsing from maps is one which has been used frequently by Evelyn Penrose, a well-known English diviner whose gift was taken her to many parts of the world and led her into a number of strange adventures. She was born in Cornwall and inherited the gift of dowsing from her father, who in turn inherited it from his mother. He was a big, powerful man, Evelyn Rose says in her biography, Adventure Unlimited, and used a thick, strong rod. The rod would often skin the bark off itself and sometimes twist itself into a sort of rope in his hands, but nothing would stop it turning. He delighted in taking guests out into the grounds of their Cornish house to try to find for themselves if they had the power of dowsing, and was undeterred by the disapproval of a severe bishop who, much to his own annoyance, could not stop the rod turning with great violence in his own hands. Evelyn Penrose inherited her father's gift in generous measure, but it was not until after the deaths of her father and her mother that she set out on her travels and started to use her gift to earn her living. Her first trip was to America, where she stayed with relations in California. She was taken by her host on a visit to the oil fields, and at her instigation, he asked one of the managers whether Evelyn might be allowed to discover whether she could find oil by divining. The manager entered into the spirit of the thing and took her to a group of producing wells. She found that the reaction she got was stronger than any she had previously experienced, and when she was tested without being told on a dry well, she got no reaction, thus proving to everyone's satisfaction that she could find oil. At the end of the day, however, she was completely exhausted, for she still had to learn that oil divining produced a severe reaction, experience shared by many other diviners. In California, Evelyn Penrose met an Englishman who knew the manager of a large sugar plantation in Hawaii. The latter, it seemed, had been looking for a dowser. It was arranged that she should go to work for this man, so off she set, having been promised to be capable her fare and a fee for each well developed. She found several good wells for the plantation manager, but she was eventually cheated of the money due to her and discovered that a contract made by cable could not be enforced. So, cutting her losses, Evelyn sailed for Canada. She left the ship at Vancouver Island and, armed with many introductions from friends, traveled round British Columbia. The main subject of conversation at the time was the terrible drought, which was then in its 7th year. When local fruit growers learned that she was a dowser, they approached her. But even if she did find water, she asked how they could, and ruined by the drought, find the money to develop the wells. So an appointment was made for her with the Minister of Finance, who fortunately also happened to be the district representative in the Legislative Assembly, whom she managed to persuade that it would be to his own interest to do something for the fruit growers, and thus she found herself appointed as official water diviner to the government of British Columbia. Evelyn Primrose was a tremendous success in the drought-stricken valleys, earning herself the title of Divine Lady among the fruit growers and a reputation for independence of character. Her work took her on to look for oil and gold in addition to water, and her adventures included meeting a grizzly bear and being affected by a curse which Red Indians had put upon an area from which the white men had evicted them, so that she could not work there. During her stay in British Columbia, what she described as a great event in her divining career happened to Evelyn Penrose. This took the shape of a letter from the president of the English Diviners Society, accompanied by a book giving an account of a congress in Paris which had met to study the claims of diviners. It was from this book that Evelyn first learned of the idea of divining from a map, and it struck her as being far-fetched and well-nigh impossible, for she felt it was totally inexplicable that there could be some contact between printed map and ground it presented. Various experiments indicated without a doubt, however, that she could indeed divine from maps, but she found the discovery so alarming that she decided to go to France and England, as the Diviners' Association of both those countries were holding congresses that summer, and she longed to discuss the matter with her fellows. At the Congress in France, Evelyn was the only woman among some 500 delegates from all over the world. She had hoped to remain inconspicuous, but in conversation with another delegate mentioned that finding her hands became so torn and blistered from using a forked stick, she sometimes used her bare hands. She was the center of an interested group, but she found it impossible to teach any of them how to work without apparatus. At the end of the Congress, she was made a maître sorcière, or master diviner, the first woman ever to receive the honor. She also learned a great deal about divining from maps, and this is how she describes the system she worked out for herself, using bare hands and no tools. I get government survey maps of 1 inch to the mile, which in most countries are about 27 inches by 27 inches. I do all my preliminary work with my eyes shut, which necessitates having an assistant to listen to what I say. I have taught myself to talk aloud and notice where I receive the strongest reactions. I start by rubbing my hands over the map until it seems to turn into something alive. I get the same sensations and shocks from the map as I would from the actual ground. Every mineral gives its own special sensation. Sometimes the map becomes alive instantaneously, irrespective of distance. At others, I seem to meet a curious barrier of antagonism and the map remains dead. Then it takes great determination and concentration to make my contact with the area, but once it is made, I have no further trouble. I start the actual work of rubbing the tips of my fingers over a small area and waiting. If I am looking for oil and my hands rest immobile, I know that there is no oil there. If my hands are over oil, they start to rise alternately. Where the oil is very rich, my arms and hands are thrown back with such force that I think they would be torn out of their sockets if I were not double-jointed. All this is done with my eyes shut. My assistant then takes the maps and numbers the area according to the violence of my reactions. After her return to England, Evelyn Penrose tried her hand at finding tin and wolfram in her native Cornwall and coal in Scotland. In Bath, she undertook what she describes as perhaps one of her oddest jobs. The search for the body of the goddess Minerva, whose bronze head was discovered in the remains of the temple near Pump Room. Sorry, I gotta clear my throat real quick. Since it was impossible to get a sample of the goddess to keep her turned into it and enable her to make contact with the remainder, she was obliged to make do with a handkerchief and had to keep returning to the museum to rub it over the head to get the vibration. She had explored the site of the temple and the area around the pump room, but got nothing except a continual pull in one direction, which eventually led her to the middle of the main street. Since it was a busy street, it was arranged that at midnight the police should divert the traffic from the area in which Miss Penrose wanted to work. This time the pedestal with the head of the goddess was brought out, so that she could pass her hands over its head to get the vibrations. Watched stolidly by the policemen and slowly growing crowd of astonished citizens, Evelyn Penrose set to work. She had arranged with 2 members of the pump room committee, and if she found anything, she would drag her heel along the road. They would follow and chalk her in marking. Soon she discovered something round. The 2 committee men went to work with the chalk, and when they had finished, became most excited. For although it was probably not the body of the goddess, it had very much the shape of a shield. They begged her to continue, and this time she found something long, which could be a spear. The next day, the city fathers met to decide whether to dig up the road in order to recover the objects, but in the end they decided that, since it was not the body, they would not grant permission. The escape from the attentions of the Italian government, then at war with Abyssinia, who wished to employ her to search for water 30 miles in front of their advanced troops, Evelyn Penrose set off again in her travels via Jamaica and Chile to South Africa. When the Second World War broke out, she felt it was wise to leave Africa and was offered a job in Australia looking for oil and water. However, on her arrival, Evelyn found that there had been a change of government and nobody now in office would employ her. Finding that a drought was threatening to devastate large areas of eastern Australia, she offered her services to the Graziers Association and was gladly accepted. During this period, she found opportunities, too, of successfully testing her theory that by hammering the ground above it was possible to clear blockages on underground streams, which had caused wells to run dry. She also did some prospecting for gold with considerable success, but alas, when the government was approached for a mining permit, the farmer was told that the area had been made into a national park and no mining leases could be granted in any circumstances. The scope of a diviner's power varies considerably and can change from one day to another. Evelyn Penrose once found water from a map, which later turned out to be hopelessly inaccurate and, from a diviner's point of view, theoretically useless. How this happened, she never understood, but incidents of this kind are by no means uncommon in the experience of a diviner. Evelyn Penrose once spoke of Paul Brunton, one of the most advanced European yogis, about the great force emanating from the earth which governs diviners at their work, and asked him, should they become really angry when divining, could they use this force for evil, even to the extent of killing someone? She showed him a quick, simple gesture with one hand by which she believed this to be possible. Astonished, Brunton asked her where she had come by this knowledge. It was perfectly correct, he said, but she had no right, unless she had studied the highest aspects of yoga, to the power such knowledge gave. Hastily, Evelyn assured him that she had never put the knowledge to the test on man or beast, nor even wished it. It is generally accepted that the diviner's power is very strong, and that it can be exhausting to the user, and even if it is used too continually, harmful to him. Nobody knows whether the power comes from outside the diviner or through him, or whether it emanates from within him. The British Society of Dowsers, which was founded in 1933 and has about 700 members, has come to the conclusion that the cause of dowsing phenomenon is not a radiation of some kind, referred to by some radiesthesia, but is probably due to a subconscious appreciation on the part of the dowser. Scientists have certainly never been able to detect or measure any rays reaching dowser. If the subconscious is responsible, then this mysterious gift becomes even more inexplicable, leaving one only with the knowledge that man still has a great deal to learn about himself. Well, boys and girls, that brings us to famous magicians of history, but we have about, let's say, 25 minutes, or is that 15? I think that's 15. Nope, 25. It's 25 minutes. So if you haven't tried dowsing, it's pretty interesting. So for me, after my mom was killed by a drunk driver and my dad sent us for a visit with our grandparents, my granny, totally old school, her and my grandpa were both part German. No, she was part German, but they were both part Cherokee. I don't know what else my grandpa was. I think he could be Italian, but his records are very null and void, basically. Like, there's not a lot of records for his side of the family. But yeah, my grandma, Flora, she taught me how to douse by hickory stick. You can use hickory, applewood. There's so many different kinds of wood that you can use for dowsing. And like they said in the story, it's in the shape of a Y, and once you start approaching water, it'll start bouncing profusely, and they even talked about it turning a circle. I never had that happen with me, but that's pretty interesting. And then, after I started my own paranormal group, Four Corners Paranormal Investigations, our family and my husband's family decided to go for a trip to Las Vegas, and we stayed at Circus, and we went and visited many places and had a different experience. Even Kingman, Arizona. Holy shnikes, that place was crazy. When we were in Vegas, I was like, man, I've always wanted to go on a paranormal investigation with another group, and my daughter had always wanted to go as well, so we booked a paranormal investigation with this group in Vegas, and we met somewhere downtown. I can't even remember the address now, but it was very, very downtown where, like, the street malls are, and met up with a group. This lady was really cool, very good energy, took us to different locations, and actually gave us copper dowsing rods. And these have a handle of like a Bic pen, or you can buy plastic in that same radius from a hardware store and use copper wire hangers or buy copper and make your own dowsing rods. But these things, holy shnikes, first time I ever tried copper dowsing rods was amazing. And very interesting to me, the power that it draws off of, the power that it collides with, and your power along with the power of the rods and whatever spirit is going on with it. I felt like at some point I had to arch my back to get this to work. And at this point we were at a 4-way stop in the middle of old, like original downtown Las Vegas, where the original casinos were and everything. And supposedly a little girl went to cross the road and got ran over by a stagecoach. So of course, they try to treat her. She passed away, and I was just getting all kinds of answers from her, and the dowsing rods are pointing different directions, and then we would walk from place to place after that. And as I was walking, the dowsing rods would just spin like helicopter rotors. It was pretty interesting to see the energy going. And we came to the museum, which used to be the original courthouse, now a museum, and we're looking for gangsters. And me and Kinsey, my daughter who just turned 22, we're looking for the gangster that had pulled off this hit. And there's several men. Oh man, I want to say the Valentine's Day murders, but I don't think it is. I think it was something else, like really, really bad in that area. But he was the main guy to pull it off. And in this picture with our dowsing rods, everyone else was facing forward, but the guy that was the leader running this pack was facing backwards. All you could see was the back of his head. So that was pretty interesting. Orbs throughout pictures there. When we stayed at Circus, I was hearing screaming. Nobody else was hearing it, but I was hearing it. So I think it was just some sort of residual energy or something going on. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, dowsing really does work. And it's amazing. People still do use it. So I'm going to start the story that we're going to start perhaps next week. Yeah. If we do another story time this month, it'll be this coming Sunday. So this next story is called Famous Magicians of History. Throughout the centuries, men have sought knowledge and power, knowledge of the meanings and secrets of life which might give them power over their fellow men. This, delving into the unknown, with all its implications, caused such fear that the pursuit of secular knowledge was condemned by the early church as part of the devil's domain. Such scholars were credited with powers that were, on the whole, totally without foundation, with carrying out experience which, largely because they were incomprehensible, were regarded as evil. Scientists and philosophers who did, perhaps, succeed in learning more about the way the universe of men's minds worked, were feared and misunderstood to the point at which they were accused of being in league with the devil. Men who, through experiment and self-discipline, developed certain powers were suspected of having sold their souls to the devil in order to pertain this superior knowledge and to be able to call strange forces to their command. Sometimes men did indeed discover some of the secrets of nature and managed to achieve feats which even today would be remarkable. Among them, a handful of names stand out: Faust, the necromancer; Cagliostro, the diabolist; Dr. Dee, the astrologer; and Nostradamus, the soothsayer. Faust has now become virtually a legend, but there was indeed a Dr. Johann Faust who lived from about 1488 to 1541 in Swabia. He is reputed to have studied necromancy, the raising of the spirits of the dead, in Krakow, and to have been a famous astrologer, diviner, medium, and alchemist. The first history of Dr. Faust appeared at Frankfurt in 1587, when it was declared that he had learned the secrets of the future from the spirits he evoked. There is little doubt that Johann Faust was something of a character and a charlatan, a wanderer, conjurer, taking every advantage of a dexterous age. Modern mediums, however, raise the spirits of the dead, and astrology today is a perfect, respectable subject. Alchemy, the basis of our modern systematic chemistry, was most commonly known for its belief in the transmutation of metals, most hopefully into gold, and it still has its 20th century adherents. Reports of alleged successful transmutations having recently come from France and Armenia. Faust made such an impression in his 16th century compatriots, and legends grew so rapidly around his name, that the true story of his life has become buried in fiction. At about the same time, however, there lived in Europe another notable magician whose life story is not only well known, but who has left behind a remarkable document, the effects of which will survive for centuries: Nostradamus. He was born Michel de Nostradam, or Notre Dame, in Saint Remy province in 1503, and was the son of a notary. He studied arts at Avignon and philosophy, medicine, and probably astrology at the University of Montpellier. This was the period in which Europe was ravaged by a series of plagues, and, even before he qualified as a doctor in 1529, Nostradamus became well known for his successful treatment of its victims. The grateful city fathers paid him for his services and gave him a pension, and Nostradamus settled down to general practice in Agen. But he could not save his own young wife and 2 sons from the Black Death, and, shattered by his loss, he wandered through Europe for many years before he finally settled down in Salon de Croix, and, in 1547, married again. During his years of wandering, several incidents had shown that he had clairvoyant gifts, and after his second marriage, he decided to begin the task of writing down some of the events which, to him, the future plainly held. He wrote all his prophecies in quatrains, and the first of the 7 volumes, called Centuries, appeared in 1555. The prophecies soon became famous. Although they were by no means easy to understand, Nostradamus knew perfectly well that prophecy was regarded as a gift of the devil, and so he made them as difficult as possible for all but the discerning reader to understand, so as not to scandalize their fragile hearing. He used what he himself called abstruse and twisted sentences, and wrote everything down under a figure cloudy rather than plainly prophetic. After the publication of his second edition, Nostradamus was sent by Henry II, probably at the instigation of Catherine de Medici, who was deeply interested in the occult arts. He soon became a favorite at court, a rosy-cheeked, hard-working old man in a long black gown, who slept only 4 or 5 hours every night and was eagerly sought after by all the courtiers to foretell their future, as well as by every man of learning in Europe. Nostradamus foresaw the death of Henry II in one of his quatrains, which reads, "The young lion shall overthrow the old, in warlike field, in single fight. In a golden cage he will pierce the eye, 2 wounds won, then die a cruel death." Excuse me. Henry was in fact killed during a tourney, riding against the captain of the Scottish Guard. The point of the captain's lance pierced the gilded cage-like visor which the king wore. His eye was pierced, and a splinter entered his throat. Nostradamus continued in favor, and when the boy King Charles the Fourth, or is that the 9th? I think that's the 9th, succeeded to the throne, he visited Ceylon. While on a progress through France, he made Nostradamus his physician in ordinary and gave him the title of counselor. Nostradamus cast the horoscope of the young brother of the king and foretold that he would one day be king himself. Henry of Navarre, then a child, was also in the royal party, and to him Nostradamus prophesied that he would one day become heir to the whole of France. In 1565, Nostradamus, prosperous and respected citizen, died of dropsy. Oh my. He himself said that his prophecies covered the years 1555 to 3797, and some of them are remarkably accurate, while others are so obscure as to be virtually incomprehensible. He went, one feels, a little too far in his attempts to not upset those of fragile hearing. The quatrains and the sixtains in which he later wrote are full of metaphors, allegories, and allusions. He used anagrams continuously, and just to confuse the issues still further, he often changed the letters into anagrams or omitted one altogether. Thus, rapis is a simple anagram for Paris, but Argaste was his anagram for estrange, foreign, by which name he called Marie Antoinette. Nostradamus foretold many events of the French Revolution, which would not take place for more than 200 years, and his prophecies were not confined to his own country. One of his more precise quatrains, he did not often give exact dates, refers to Elizabeth I, and was made while Mary Tudor was still on the throne. The rejected one shall at last come to the throne, her enemies found to be conspirators. Her period shall triumph as never before. At 70 she shall die, in the 3rd year of the century. Elizabeth died in her 70th year in 1603. Another precise forecast referred to the fire of London of 1666. The blood of the just shall be required of London, burned by the fire, and thrice 26. The old dame, Nostradamus' term for the cathedral, shall fall from on high, and many edifices of the same belief shall be destroyed. He foresaw Napoleon's end. The captive prince, conquered and sent to Elba. He will sail across the Gulf of Genoa to Marsalis. By the huge efforts of foreign armies he is overcome. Though he escapes the fire, he shall yield blood by the barrel. And the coming of 3 antichrists, the first 2, Napoleon and Hitler, the third presage for 1999 years and 7 months. Nostradamus' prophecies are quite fascinating. What else but a bombing raid can he be referring to when he speaks of? Okay, so I'm kind of going back right now to the 1999 years and 7 months. So that was George W. I don't know. Alright, so he speaks of living fire and death hidden in gloams will be loosed, horrible and terrifying. By night enemy forces will reduce the city to powder. The fires already burning being favorable to the enemy. And considering their remarkable accuracy, he was fortunate, perhaps due to his care in not revealing unpleasant features to those in power, to die in prosperity and his bed. A contemporary, Dr. John Dee, who was born some 20 years after Nostradamus, was not so fortunate, although he was perhaps the greatest of all English magicians, and also for a time enjoyed the favor of Queen Elizabeth and her court. Like others who experimented and sought knowledge, he was also feared and reveled. He was accused of practicing witchcraft and necromancy and of causing the death of children by magic spells. Queen Elizabeth, however, had such belief in his power that when a puppet, made in her likeness, was found with a spike driven through it and left to rot away in Lincoln's Inn Fields, she at once sent for Dr. Dee to ward off the magic. Despite the Queen's patronage, Dee feared that he might be accused of devilish arts and insisted that Mr. Secretary Wilson should accompany him to the spot in order to see for himself that I only do it by godly means. On this occasion, Dr. Dee, having looked at the waxen image with considerable care, decided that it was all a practical joke and there was no threat to the Queen's life, since there were no indications that the doll had been made by a skilled magician. When he reported his opinion to the Queen, she, having such faith in her court astrologer that she rarely undertook any major venture without consulting him, was quite happy to accept his advice. Dee's life, however, was not always so easy. He had a good education at Chelmsford Grammar School and then at St. John's, Cambridge, and in 1547, when he was 20 years old, he went to Louvain in Belgium to study the arts and sciences. He even soon became known as a scientist, mathematician, geographer, and astrologer, and returned to England in 1551 with his reputation made. Henry VI, that unusually percipient boy king who might have done much to enlighten his age, had he not died so prematurely, gave John Dee a pension. But after Mary Tudor's accession in 1553, things changed. Mary was much displeased by Dee's occult practices, no doubt annoyed by his uncompromising disapproval of her activities, and he was for a while actually imprisoned. Indeed, was fortunate to escape his life. However, he had cast Elizabeth's horoscope and foretold that she would become queen, and as soon as this was fulfilled, all was well. Dee was even asked by Robert Dudley to choose a propitious date for the Queen's coronation. Thereafter, Nostradamus became a familiar figure at court, on easy terms with the great and often visited by them in his own home at Moorlake, where he lived with his wife and 3 children. There he proceeded to study astrology, mathematics, optics, and alchemy, but he still had his enemies and, despite royal protection, a fearful and superstitious mob. Aroused by his enemies, broke into his house while Dee was away on a visit to Germany and destroyed many of his 4,000 books together with his magical instruments. What a bunch of frickin' a-holes. Holy shnikes. He continued, however, to dabble in the occult, basically because he was obsessed with the idea of finding a source of cosmic wisdom through which the purpose of human life would be revealed. He had some psychic powers and was given a crystal for gazing. He wrote in his diary in 1581, "I had sight in cristallo offered me, and I saw." Unfortunately, he does not relate what it was he saw. Nevertheless, he apparently felt that his limited powers were holding up his experiments, and after advice from the angel Anael, through a preacher called Barabbas Saul, he conducted an experiment with a young man named Edward Kelly. Kelly set the crystal on the table before him and fell to prayer and entreaty while Dee retired to his oratory to pray. After a quarter of an hour, a vision of an angel, Uriel, the spirit of light, ordained that Dee and Kelly should work together. Well, boys and girls, we are basically at the end of our time. Holy shnikes. That kind of went by fast, but then at the same time, it kind of felt like forever. But again, we were reading from 50 Strange Stories of the Supernatural, True Accounts of Weird and Otherworldly Happenings. Yes. So, I really want to thank myself. Just kidding. Thank you guys for coming out tonight and listening to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It was a pleasure having you all. And thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's KPNL Radio, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow night when we have Miss Mia Savage on, and the Angry Hellhounds. For some unapparent reason, somebody let the Hellhounds out. But hey, it's just in time for the end of the show. So tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about the paranormal with Miss Mia Savage. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. If you want to join us for the Skype after party, send me a Skype contact at tessa.n.thomas30@gmail.com or give us a call on your cell phone at 970-335-9596. Thank you to our musical sponsor, Mr. Roy Washington. I also want to thank our volunteers and financial sponsors, Mr. Jim Morris of the Scottish Isles, Mr. Del Elson, Mr. Kevin McDougall, Miss Mia Savage, and also our supporters, Diecast J, aka J Mathis. You guys, until next time, nighty night, love and light. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you back here, same time, same place. You guys take care of my yous.